Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of Read T-Plus, where I take old stories I've narrated and update into modern audio standards. This particular story is called The Human Horror. The human ship had been taken, its corpses expelled into the void, and then absorbed into the hull of the Svenian vessel, according to the usual trophy protocols. Now the crew of the Svenian vessel sought the human homeworld. New space-going species were rare, and even rarer in this sector since the Svenians had achieved faster-than-light travel. Their viciousness had given them an advantage over most other species, and while the small human exploratory vessel had put up an admirable fight for its size, it was quickly outmatched. The Svenian captain stood inside the remains of the human ship, just one of dozens of trophy ships that made up part of the larger vessel, and breathed in its heightened sensitivity, finding the remaining human scent delicious to its senses. But as the captain sniffed, it heard something too, like a soft breath. Go. The captain turned, looking about, every nerve ending on edge, every sense straining, but finding nothing. He gave the human passageway a last sense and began to leave, but then stopped, glancing back quickly. Was there something there? It strained its eyes and stepped down the passageway. But there was nothing. It finally left, slightly uneasy, a rare emotion for an aggressive Svenian race. A Svenian day after the absorption of the human ship, reports had come in across the vessel. Something from the human ship had survived and had made its way across the vessel, penetrating even the best sealed compartments. There were noises, near sightings of creature or creatures who somehow managed to evade every attempt to see them, much less capture them. No hostile actions, but with the unseen enemy everywhere, an alien feeling of dread and fear rose, of the type the Svenians enjoyed seeing in their prey, and so rarely felt themselves. The Svenian command team met with the science crewmen, and found that while the finely tuned Svenian senses could hear and nearly see and certainly sensed the presence of something horrific, the invaders remained invisible to all scientific equipment. The Svenian captain, having had enough, mastered its fear and stalked to the center of the human ship, where its command center had once been. The captain snarled out a guttural demand for the surviving creatures to show themselves and submit to combat. That they would be found and destroyed if the entire ship had to be taken apart at the atomic level. The captain stood, hearing its voice echoing through the remains of the ship, listening, peering, feeling the air shift on its sensitive hide as its anger rose, waiting for a reply. Then, a cold, cold draught of air somehow blew through the perfectly controlled atmosphere of the Svenian vessel, and the captain shivered, first from the chill, then in absolute terror. A creature emerged from the shadows, a human, the captain thought at first, but not quite. It was somehow not solid. There, but not there. And human, but also something else. Something worse. While the humans the captain had slain at close quarters were formidable, this seemed nearly insubstantial. But as it advanced, the heretofore unknown feeling of absolute horror overwhelmed the captain, who longed to scramble away, but was locked in place by fear. Go no further, the creature howled at the captain, raising an accusing finger. As it pointed, the flesh of the finger crumbled away, leaving only bone. Then, to the captain's absolute panic, all flesh of the human-like creature crumbled into a rotting heap on the deck, leaving a skeleton with terrible, glowing eye sockets that advanced on the captain. A skeletal hand plunged into the captain's chest, passing unharmed except for a feeling of electrical interstellar cold, and, finally, the captain found enough composure to scream, and it bled down the corridor until it found its own quarters, where it collapsed, shrieking. Half a Svenian day later, the remains of the human ship were forcibly ejected from the larger vessel towards a gravity well, along with a fairly significant amount of Svenian's own hull. So urgent was the chief officer's haste. The captain was told of this, but even so, it refused to leave its quarters for some time. As the Svenian vessel powered away, leaving the human wreckage alone in the void, and all thought of finding the human homeworld abandoned, the fear that enveloped the crew faded with each passing star. But something still seemed to lurk within the vessel, something that could not be found or cleansed, and eventually, upon reaching their own space, the Svenians would hurtle their own vessel into a star and escape with gratitude. Several Svenian star cycles later, the data captured from a human vessel and retained with many misgivings would be analyzed, and the Svenians would learn of the human tales of ghosts and of the concept of the afterlife, unique to humanity. The Svenian scientists theorized and eventually proved to themselves that while such ghosts remained largely undetected by humans or other species, to the Svenians' heightened senses, they were all too apparent. The ghosts, whatever they were, emotional imprints or actual remnants of something that humans possessed that was immortal and unbound by flesh, were real and terrifying. The Svenians never sought to discover the planet called Earth. Attacking a planet full of such creatures and unleashing billions of vengeance-seeking ghosts upon their own species was unthinkable. When the humans reached the stars in great numbers, they found the Svenians that so many other species had feared to be quite accommodating and highly unwilling to engage in aggression, at least towards humans. An odd partnership emerged, with the human presence mellowing the formerly savage Svenians. However, even after many decades of relations, the humans could never understand the Svenians' attitude toward Halloween. End of story. Story number 2. Rules, written by Bellymaster. What do you think it's doing? Durgeon stood stock still, studying the human technician they'd hired. She had no idea what it was doing. Durgeon was an ore transporter. Her mother had been an ore transporter, and with no other female siblings to carry on the tradition, she'd stepped up to the task, back and forth from the fringe planets, in and out from gravity well farms, up and down from asteroid fields. Durgeon did her best to make her mother proud. She worked for a good business with decent contracts and acceptable commissions. There was nothing remarkable about her. Durgeon unfolded 6 of her thumbs, or creepy chest and black arms, as the humans have often said, and tried to imitate the human's movement. It was using some sort of holographic display to imitate and check the gyro-stabilizing engine. But instead of knocking on the metals used to test their timbre and tone, the human was running her hands and some device over the gears to feel them. The human spoke without warning. How personal. The 2nd and 4th gear need to be replaced. The metal is good, but the teeth have been stripped a few micromillimeters. The human looked over at them. You've been switching from 2nd to 4th without going through 3rd. Durgeon's pilot tensed up, then looked away. She answered for her. Conflict had never run strong in her life. Yes, we have. The ship seems to respond to it better. The human took off its gloves and closed the access panel to the gyro-stabilizer gearbox. 2 more months of that and you'd be corkscrewing through space. I'm not going to report you. You seem like an honest type. However, you need to promise me that you'll replace those gears before leaving the port. Durgeon twitched a few times, signifying curiosity. When the human didn't respond, she spoke. Promise? You have to give me your word. Declare that you'll do it. Durgeon didn't understand. Of course I will. Why wouldn't I? The human grunted and turned to check the rest of the engine. You'll be surprised at what some people try to get away with. The human, who went by the human name Daniel, turned off her holographic display and walked around the engine once, turned off 2 of the idling inflow valves, then bled the excess pressure and counted to 20. She then removed the main inflow and checked the intake. Durgeon couldn't help but stare. Pardon my rudeness, Technician Daniel, but why do you enact so many small tasks in order to begin one? Daniel shoved her arm inside the intake valve and began feeling around. her face contorted with effort. Pre-checks. Gotta follow the rules.
Why?
The human pulled out a hard chunk of silicate. There's your main issue. You had a sedimentary buildup. How long since this was last cleaned? She struck an arm in again. The urchin checked, throwing her mind through her acquired memories. About 3 generations ago. Jeez! She pulled out another chunk the size of a fist. No wonder it was off-kilter. You're supposed to clean it every 16 orbits. Jurgen committed that order to memory, then asked her question again. Why these rules, though? Why not just do as you're made to do? The human stopped. What are you talking about? Your mind. It is not made up of the most important memories of your ancestors. No, we don't have generational knowledge retention, and that's why we have rules. She pulled out the last piece and began hooking up the gyro-stabilizing engine again. The reason I checked the inflow valves is because 14 years ago, a mechanic named David Anderson checked the intake without turning them off or bleeding the pressure. His hand ruptured, and he suffered an air embolism. Jurgen didn't follow. But you know of this. But was technician David your father? Did he impart this knowledge to you on your birth? Daniel shook her head as she picked up the silicate piece and placed them in a sack on her harness. No, we learned about him. He is an example of what not to do. She turned on a holographic display and pulled up an extensive list. This is the rule book, and I follow it religiously. Out here, this is my Bible, the difference between life and death. She pointed to the bulleted points on the list, each taking a single line. Durgeon leaned in to see. There were 4 columns, and it was on a page 460. Durgeon pulled back. There are so many. Why must you follow all of these? It is too much. The human shook its head. Each one of these rules is in place because blood was shed. Every measure we take, every time I stop and reevaluate, it's because someone either died or was injured doing it wrong. She flicked off the display. Our rules are written in blood, and we follow them so nobody else gets hurt. It doesn't always work, but we try. Durgeon contemplated this, then watched as the human meticulously ran through her checks of the engine and finally switched it back on. The gentle rocking of the transport ship immediately gave way to an even keel. Durgeon thanked the mothers, then thought to thank the technician. Thank you, technician Daniel. It feels as though my ship has returned to her old self. I haven't felt her this steady since my mother flew her. Not a problem. Now, what are you going to do before leaving port? Replace the 2nd and 4th gear. Right on. Now let's go check the rest of your ship. Durgeon led onward, her initial doubt about the human allayed. While Durgeon only had the collective experience of her mothers before her, this human had the collective experience of her entire race behind her. She was in good hands. End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.